Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I'm your host, Peter Dixon. We're here tonight at a different time where it's Monday, 8:30 p.m. 8:53 p.m. now. We're running a bit late. Sydney time, New South Wales, and it's great to have your company tonight. We're going to have a really fascinating discussion centering around the Citipointe Christian College's recent enrolment kind of saga, shall we call it. And we've got a panel here. So I'd like everyone to welcome, please, Tammy Panicook. Nice to have you here. Arden Cassie, great to have you too. Dr. Wendell Rosevear, good to have you here with us.
Hi there.
And Dr. Ruth Ellen Mark as well. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And of course, Nathan Brown, great to have you as well.
Of course. I'm not sure why, of course, but happy to be here.
Great to have you. And look, we're going to dig straight in and discuss this Citipointe Christian College. I guess pretty much where they had a contract that they wanted the parents to sign. And I'm going to ask Ruth Ellen in a moment to dig into that and to outline a little bit more about what the ramifications of that are or were. And then the rest of the panel will have a bit of a chat as well. And then we'll have a conversation about it. And we also want people who are watching to send in comments and ask questions as we go. Perhaps hold off questions until a little bit later, because they do go down the feed there and I miss out on them. And those of you that are admin, just keep an eye on the conversation in the comments as well. We want to make sure there's no trolling going on and we can kind of delete and boot and kick out or whatever. And someone has said, when can we ask questions? Well, I guess you can ask anytime, but just be aware that the feed kind of scrolls up, and if it disappears out of my view, then I won't ask it. You can type it again later, of course. Now, I want to just read something that someone sent to me this week. They would have loved to have been on the program, I know, for sure. And they've written their experience as a trans person. And I'm sure there's many different experiences that trans people hold. But this person has been feeling particularly hurt and hammered by all that has been going on politically and religiously in Australia lately. So just for those that are watching from overseas, the Citipointe Christian College drama has been centering here in Australia. And so this person, has been feeling hurt and hammered by the political and religious goings on here in Australia. So I just wanted to read a short note that they sent that just shares a little bit about their experience. So this is from Crystal. When I finally stopped hiding my decades-old secret, hidden since I was 4, multiple decades of deep inner pain, darkness, and often wanting to die, as well as a wall of loneliness lifted, and I was set free. I could not go back into hiding because it was killing me. No psychological therapies or medications, or spiritual or personal development had a fraction of the healing effect that authenticity and being seen, known, and loved by safe, loving, and accepting people had on me. I'd never heard about transgender people in my first decades of life. I loved who I was inside, even though I knew society and church struggled with accepting people like me. When I stopped hiding the woman I am and was loved, safe, accepted, and belonging, I found life, health, and thriving. It's a miracle. If the mental health healing had come through prayer and church experiences, I could have written a book and spoken to church people with a wonderful testimony that inspired many. But because my miracle came from being authentic and true and revealing my transgender self, my testimony and story remains hidden from much of the church community. Church statements see me as not okay and as a problem, and I fear to be known. Yet in the new places and with people where I find acceptance, love, and belonging, I thrive and shine, and I'm welcome with my many gifts that touch lives, build community, encourage people to be authentic. Christians in general and Adventists often scare me. I don't feel emotionally, spiritually, or socially safe or welcome. I've seen too many public statements, seen too many anti-transgender social media posts, and heard too many unkind things in church contexts, official and unofficial. Governments and Christian lobbyists have turned people like me into political footballs and been willing to throw us under the bus, and transgender school children under the school bus. Yet I've been surprised how a number have shown the Spirit of Jesus to me over the years, and with them I am safe, loved, and able to thrive. People on the margins of society and religion were safe and welcome with Jesus. I'm deeply touched with when someone accepts me and quotes the text about God knowing me as He created me and formed me in the womb. That I am designed, loved, and accepted by God. If I'd kept hiding who I was, I'd be dead. Being authentic and finding safe, loving, and accepting people, I've come to life. It was ultimately a simple choice, although extremely tough, when a number of Christian and others make life cruel and unsafe. I'm not an ideological problem to deal with or gotten rid of, or a theological problem to solve and church problem to fight against. I'm a beautiful person with a big heart and kind, gentle spirit who wants, like every human, to be loved, to belong, to be treated with dignity and respected, to be included and safe. I'm a human like you and one of those who Jesus loves. I'm also made in the image of God, a God who is transgender, as in is beyond gender, who is also transgender, as in inclusive of genders. In a Genesis creation story, it is said that humans were created in the image of God, female and male. In some Indigenous American nations, transgender people were given spiritual ceremonial roles and seen as having a divine gift of being able to see through the eyes of female and male genders. Transgender people had a place with their gifts and authenticity in those communities. We long to belong and be valued and have our gifts seen and valued. Almost every day there is something or someone harsh or cruel I experience because I am who I am. There are times it's so painful and exhausting, I feel like I don't belong on the planet, in this society, or in church. While being true to who I am is liberating, when I'm with people who show kind and loving actions and words, navigating the harshness of too many people, church, governments, and society has a terrible cost in my emotions, mind, body, and soul. It takes huge effort to stand against all that. We all need kindness and gentleness. We all need safety. We all need inclusion and love. We all need to have our gifts valued. When we have that, we thrive. And thank you, Crystal, for sharing that with us. And I know they are deeply felt thoughts and a deep, heartfelt sentiment written there as a direct response from the politics that's sort of humming around us at the moment. Ruth Ellen, for those who haven't heard about the Citipointe Christian College contract and the news that's going on at the moment, can you unpack for us a little bit about that and what's going on?
Sure. So about 2 weeks ago, the story broke that a school called Citipointe Christian College, which is a Brisbane Pentecostal school, had quite rapidly asked its parents to sign a contract of enrolment. So this was done a couple of days prior to the beginning of school starting, with no notice to the parents. I believe from speaking with one of the parents at the school that something like it had been murmured about, but there had been no consultation, no concrete steps taken, and it was essentially sprung on the parents of the school to sign on behalf of their children, some of their children sort of very young, primary and preschool age, to cover their entire time at the school. So I'll read you a small excerpt from the contract of enrolment that's publicly available. It was 16 pages apparently, but the definitions of the Declaration of Faith and the family, marriage, sexuality section was what was particularly controversial. So they basically said, as an expression of our commitment to biblical Christianity, the Centre holds to both the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed as foundational Christian beliefs. That's not controversial. And then it says, the centre expresses these beliefs in the following statements. And their family, marriage and sexuality and gender statement has 3 paragraphs. I can post it if anyone wants to read the whole thing. But it basically said that we believe the family as instituted and created by God is the fundamental building block of society. So they state that the biblical and historical belief is that a family begins with covenantal institution, holy estate of marriage that can only occur between a biological man and a biological woman, and it's exclusively entered into for life. It says that we believe that any form of sexual immorality, and then it lists a whole list together. It says not limited to adultery, fornication, homosexual acts, bisexual acts, bestiality, incest, pedophilia, and pornography is sinful and offensive to God and is destructive to human relationships and society. So they basically went on to say that they reserved the right to ask any student to leave who no longer accepted that this was a reasonable and biblical contract, essentially. Basically saying if you're going to be any of these things, bestiality, pedophilia, homosexuality, all in the same sentence, then you're no longer welcome at school. So not surprisingly, there was a huge uproar. And my understanding is that this was a new-ish principle and that he had made it very clear that he wanted to enter the culture wars, as it were, and that this was not done without a degree of forethought as to how it would affect families, and that it was also done deliberately around the time that the religious discrimination bill discussion was gaining steam in the House of Reps and the Senate, potentially going to the Senate. So that's basically what happened. A number of parents, a group of 20 or 25 parents, weren't really getting any traction trying to discuss it in-house, and so they went to the media. And it blew up in the principal's face. 155,000 people signed a petition for the school to withdraw the contract. There started to be discussions about removing their state funding. The principal was forced to stand down. And the school, in the words of a parent that Nathan and I had the privilege of chatting with on Friday, is just destroyed. Everybody's destroyed.
Ruth Ellen, did you see this coming, or were you surprised?
I think I saw it coming on a more macro level. I don't know that I would have predicted that an individual school would have been made an example of like this so soon.
I'm not surprised.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm totally not surprised. Someone who follows the political stuff very closely, particularly being a trans person. And this sort of rhetoric has been thrown around, especially within the state of New South Wales for 2 years now on these kinds of issues. I'm extremely unsurprised that a school decided to take a step like this. I've seen, I know of schools who have been where the staff have been like collectively praying for such, I suppose, legislative changes to empower them to do such things for a while now. So as far as I was concerned, it was only a matter of time. What surprised me was the community reaction.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. And I'm looking forward to hearing you unpack that a little bit more soon, Arden. Your response to this is the most valued for this conversation, and I appreciate you being here with us tonight.
Thanks.
Ruth Ellen, before we just hand over to Nathan, who's going to share a little bit about himself, for those who don't know him, and his experience and your experience chatting to one of the parents, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you fit into this landscape.
Well, I'm not very important, but I'm interested in the issues. I am Ruth Ellen. I am a Christian, like the rest of us on this chat. I was brought up Seventh-day Adventist. I still attend a Seventh-day Adventist church. I think my Christianity and love for Jesus is more important to me than that label these days. I am a doctor. I'm an emergency specialist working on the Gold Coast, and recently a little bit of fly-in, fly-out work as well. And I'm an educator at a university level. I teach at a medical school in the region. I've got a very close friend who came out as gay when we were 20. And so since then, we grew up in Pathfinders together in church. And I was determined to learn about what was going on for him and support him. And then later on in my 20s, a couple of other good friends came out. And now as a 30-something, mid to late 30-something, I have quite a number of very close friends who are gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual at work as well, who have varying experiences with different aspects of Christianity. And so it's for them that I like to speak out, because they're all incredible people. Many of them love Jesus. Many of them have been really hurt by the church. And I think that things need to change for them and people like them.
Yeah. And I want to ask Arden a little bit later, and also Wendell a little bit, about if they are noticing an increase in the support by allies, but we'll come to that a little bit later. Just ponder that. So I'm interested in chatting to you, Nathan. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, some of your thoughts when you saw this news release about the college. And yourself and Ruth Ellen visited one of the parents. I'm really interested to hear about that experience too. Before that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I'm Nathan, and I'm a writer and a book editor, I guess, by profession. And I get to do writing and reading and those kind of things for fun as well. I work for the Adventist Church's publishing house, Science Publishing, just out of Melbourne, here in Warburton, Victoria. And this is a topic that has caught my attention over quite a long period of time. And I guess with some of the opportunities that I've had, I've been able to hear people's stories, to interview people, to read and think and wrestle with some of these issues, and really, I guess, recognise the need for our church to do better, and for churches to do better on these topics, because of the people that have been hurt, the people who it is their community, but their community turns their back on them. And I think that's a really significant thing. And I guess one of the reasons this story caught my attention is because of that. It was a Christian community that suddenly said, you actually don't belong here anymore. To all these families, to former students, to current students. And that caught my attention. And then I was reading some of the news stories, and I recognised a name of one of the parents who was speaking to the media on this, and recognised someone who was a friend of mine at university 20 odd years ago. And I saw this discussion advertised, and I said, hey, Ruth Ellen, do you want to talk to one of the parents from the school? And this guy was good enough to give us a little of his time on Friday afternoon, and we connected from 3 different cities, and were able to have a bit of a conversation from his perspective. And one of the things that really caught my attention was simply how this was not a mainstream, or left-wing political movement that was the issue going on here. It was the community fighting with itself and destroying itself, basically. And I believe that some of the organisations like the Australian Christian Lobby have really tried to paint this as a little Christian school that could, trying to stand up for what it believes, and then getting hammered by all these big nasty lefties and crusaders and all of these kind of things. And that's simply not what happened in that situation. And I think it's such a valuable thing to recognise that when we basically try to define who's in and who's out, we're attacking ourselves, not it's not, and even there's a strange dynamic here where someone such as this principal thinks that he's standing up against the culture, And it's actually the fact that he's so influenced by the culture around him that he's decided that he needs to shove the people in his community out of the way. And that, I think, is such a valuable thing to recognise the dynamics in some of these situations. And so even, this has been a long time coming in the, really what we've seen in this context and in the religious discrimination bill of last week and how that blew up in the government's face is a hangover from the contrived situation regarding the same-sex marriage plebiscite. And, it's an attempt by the government to try and leverage the religious vote. And I think basically that they've been using churches and some of these people for political purposes, and without much in the way of good faith. And there's various things I could comment upon in that dynamic, in that, the larger political context of it. But it gets played out in real communities, in real lives, in real families. And these are people that, get hurt from that. And, I'd recommend even going back to the project. I think it was Sunday, January 30. You can go back and find it on 10 Play or whatever, where they had a couple of former students from the school visibly distressed by what was being done to them by their community, a place that they thought they belonged. And I think that was one of the most significant things. I sort of was really, it was a privilege to get that insight into this situation beyond the headlines.
Yeah, I think, can I just add to that, Nathan? Because I think we want to be really clear with the people listening to this, because regardless of any of our political beliefs or affiliations, I think it was really clear from the parent that we spoke to that his picture of what had happened was this Christian community. I'm going to use his own words because I jotted down a few of them. He said, we had this sense of being a Christian community that for decades has accommodated everyone. It works under wise and sane leadership. He said there were people in the school that believed different things. There were probably some people who were very affirming of LGBTIQ people. There were probably other people in the school that were much more sort of cautious and uncertain about those people. But they were able to coexist in harmony and be part of the same family. So this was not something that was sort of new for the school. It was just that this principle forced people into opposing camps. So he basically polarized people that were already coexisting in harmony together. So for the people who will predictably say, well, if they don't like it, they should just leave, I think you really need to take a step back and say, no, these people had been in community, in a family together, because that's what a tight-knit school community is like. And then somebody comes from the outside, takes on a new leadership role, and says, actually, you can't be a family anymore. I'm going to drive a wedge in and you have to pick a side. And that's what happened. So, some of the people that we know about had sort of multiple children at the school, had multiple people in the family working at the school, had been happily a part of that community for many, many years, and then were all of a sudden being told, you don't belong anymore unless you can sign on. And the other thing about that, I think, was the way that it was done was asking parents to make promises about what the beliefs and values of their child would be years down the track. So the parents of a prep student being asked to sign this contract to say, if my child someday is exploring themselves and they're asking questions about, am I bisexual, or am I a girl, or am I a boy, or am I gay, that those questions wouldn't be allowed under the terms of that contract. So they were limiting what the children would be able to explore, which was so offensive because parents can't commit to not asking those questions of their children or not letting their children ask those questions.
Yeah. It was sobering also to note that when I think the person in question, the principal or the head pastor, whoever it was, did his kind of final bit of a farewell, I'm stepping down for a little while speech, apparently he was given a standing ovation.
Absolutely.
And just to
he
open
was-
that up to everybody for a moment, what are your thoughts on that?
He was so Citipointe is we need to acknowledge that Citipointe is a mega church of the Brisbane area. It's not a little small tiny church that happened to have a school. No, this is a big organization. And so principal blindsides the whole school community. Everyone gets surprised by this. They get surprisingly smashed by the media and by the public at large, particularly the LGBTQ community, because the LGBT community, I promise you, has been on edge about this sort of legislation for the last 3-4 years since marriage equality. Like, yeah, we passed marriage equality, but there's a whole lot of unresolved stuff that's been hanging around that the queer community has been on edge about ever since. So we pick it up, we run with it, because that's just what the LGBT community is used to doing. And he effectively gets like hammered from all corners, and not just from the external sources, but from within as well, to his surprise. So he calls, he goes, okay, I'm going to take some temporary leave. And he fronts up to the church of the school, like the church that runs the school, and standing ovation, because he's basically just been martyred. He's been forced to step down from his gig because he's decided that he's going to step up and he's going to stand for traditional family values, or whatever the heck, whatever line they want to put, or traditional Christian values, right? So this is the first, from my point of view and how I see this playing out, this is the first in a much longer line of schools.
Yeah.
Because
I've got a question.
he's been persecuted for his faith, really.
Yeah. I've got a question. I'll leave it a little bit to later, but I might just kind of put it out there. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about what you guys think might be the case with the future of Seventh-day Adventist Church. We won't talk about that just now, but is it likely that maybe there will come a time where some of the members of the Adventist Church push leadership to maybe write a similar contract? We'll come back to that. Nathan, did you have anything else to add there with the conversation? Did the parent that you spoke to, did they say, you may have mentioned this, but did they say they were going to take their kids out of the school and look elsewhere?
Well, it was a fascinating discussion even from that perspective, because this parent said, well, I've got multiple children multiple students at the school, and even that the different students had different responses to this situation. One of them said, I just don't want to ever go back to that school. It's just destroyed me, destroyed my friends, smashed up everything. It would be an ethically immoral thing for me to go back to that school and be part of that community again. And another student said, I don't care what all they do. I just want to hang out with my friends and keep going to school. So there's not a simple answer even to that. So I think that's an interesting dynamic there. And, even this talked about the debate between, even, partners, parents, co-parents who are sort of, this is how we should respond. This is how, the polarizing effect of, just taking a hardline stance like this. And it's a terribly poor example of leadership. As was pointed out in the letter that the parents wrote for the Sydney Morning Herald, when school starts on Monday morning, to get this email at 4:58 on Friday afternoon, that's almost bullying in the way it's been handled, just in that way, and terrible leadership as far as trying to, unless you're just trying to make a headline and try and prove what a tough guy you are.
And I think
this is a place that you've got students who've been there their whole lives. Yeah. Their whole lives they've been at this school, and that's their entire community that they know. And so as a parent, you're going, well, there's this thing that I have to sign. If I don't sign it, I can't send my kids to the school with all their friends, but also I can't sign it because I think it's morally corrupt. Like, It's actually a really, really difficult choice to make. And I don't want to diminish the fact that, sure, now we're post this, most of this seems to have burnt out, where it's not in the media anymore because the principal stepped down and backed down and stuff, and what have you, and they're not forcing people to sign that statement. But don't believe for a second that that is a safe place for an LGBTQ person, because sure, they're not forcing people to write statements and say things, but what happens inside that school community would still be unbelievably toxic for LGBTQ folk.
Yeah, and I think that was what one thing we heard from the parent we spoke with as well was that some parents had signed it for the exact reason that you said, that they thought, well, my kids' friends are here, I need to protect their ability to continue their networks, and so I'll just sign it and sort of shut my eyes and sign, basically. And then later on, when they spoke with other parents and realized that they weren't the only ones who had grave misgivings about what was going on, and they banded together and wrote their article, that some of them actually backflipped and went back to the school and said, no, actually, we're going to retract our signing. We believe this is wrong. And then some teachers jumped on the bandwagon and realised that, they'd rather lose their jobs than not stand up against this. And that was when it really started to gain some traction. So really, everyone, I think, initially thought, gosh, I'm alone in thinking this is morally reprehensible. And then they started realising they weren't the only one, and were able to make a difference there.
Yeah. I just want to come to Tammy Pennacook for a moment. Tammy, you're in the education system. Tell us a little bit about yourself and, again, your involvement with the realm of which we speak. And tell us a little bit about the thoughts that came to your mind as an educator when you read that article and examined the issue about the contract.
Well, I have been an English and history high school teacher, and a few years back went through some difficulties and decided I wanted to change my focus to special education. So I got my master's in special and inclusive education. But part of that journey was I wanted to do a research master's in education. And so I spent 3 years part-time studying sexual minority students in Adventist high schools. So I didn't actually finish that degree. I moved on because of the struggles within my family that I was dealing with to special ed. But within that 3 years, I produced a 10,000 word literature review. So I know a bit about the topic. I came to study that topic because of a friend that I had, a neighbor living next door who was an atheist, and one of the most moral people I had ever met. And her brother was gay, and I invited her to go to church, being the good Adventist that I was. And she said she would never go to a church that wasn't accepting. And that was the start of my journey doing that research. So I know a bit about schools, the environment, and the damage that something like this can cause on the well-being of a young person. And so when I saw this in the news, I just thought, oh, here we go. Us beautiful, wonderful, accepting, loving Christians doing something like this. It saddens me. It gives you a feeling of sort of like hopelessness when you see this happening. But I'm really happy to hear the personal testimonies of Ruth and Nathan about the families gathering around and actually saying, no, that's not okay. We don't treat people that way, and we're not happy with this. And having that situation reversed, that actually brought a bit more hope to my perspective. And I must say, I've worked in public schools, I've worked in independent schools, and I've worked in Adventist schools. And for me, I can see changes. Maybe they're not fast enough. And they can never be fast enough when we're talking about the life and death of a young person. Like, this is life and death stuff we're talking about. But I think we are changing things. And especially Peter doing stuff like this, I think is really important. So
Thanks for that, Tammy.
Actually, Tammy, could I just say something there just with regard to our chat that Nathan and I had as well? I think that the parent we spoke to was quite optimistic in the face of something so horrible having happened at their school. I think one thing that they said was that it really encouraged their school and other Christian schools, or any school really, to ask what kind of community do we want to be?
Yeah.
And in the case of a Christian school, what kind of Christian community do we want to be? And I think, again, in this parent's own words, every time you find tangible points of ever-growing doctrinal difference, and an ever smaller group of people that wants to adhere to it, you can go down that path, but you end up with more and more sectarian schools. And you sort of come up against the issue that either you have to be really clear about your lines in the sand when you open a school, or you end up contending with a community that's already formed.
Mm.
And so I think what this parent said was that Christian schools should be quite explicit in acknowledging and accepting the fact that there are different legitimately held viewpoints on many different issues that affect Christian families.
Mm.
And, you know, because of what's happened at Citipointe, there are conversations happening there and probably in other Christian schools around Australia that have never really happened before. And the fact that we can now potentially have some of those conversations is potentially a good thing.
Yeah. Growing pains.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very important to have the conversation. Go ahead, Arden.
No, thoughts left me.
That's all right. I was about to come to you, Arden.
Okay.
I'm interested in your perspective. As I said earlier on, I really value your contribution tonight. I think hearing from you and how wonderful it was to hear from Crystal as well, that beautiful heartfelt message, and having been through quite a distressing couple of weeks.
I think
Can you share with us a little bit about you, your journey, and what your thoughts are and were when you first saw this article come out?
I mean, you read that message from Crystal. It was Crystal?
Crystal.
And I was just like, okay, roll credits, we're done. I said everything that I need to say. But I mean, so my name's Arden. My pronouns are she, her. And I am a mathematics teacher. I used to teach. So I studied at Avondale and I taught in a Christian school for a while. Realized that I was in a position where to come out and be open about who I was, that was going to make me lose my job. That was the choice I had to make. So I chose to leave my work in a career that I loved with a bunch of students that I was a huge fan of, and something I was in a work career that I was deeply passionate about, because I needed to effectively leave and invest in my mental health instead. Because for me, even at that point, as an adult trying to navigate, a young adult trying to navigate life, the options were, well, I can make this hard choice, or I cannot be around anymore. That was the dichotomy that I was staring down, because I was at a point where because, you know, one of the things that I did in my teaching is I was encouraging my students on a daily basis to be true to who they were. Because high school is a bad time, I think, for everybody. I'm yet to meet someone who's like, wow, high school was like the best years of my life. And so one of the things that I think that makes high school so hard is that teenagers are trying so hard to be who they think all their friends want them to be, and not enough time thinking about who they want to be themselves. So a big part of my teaching practice centered around empowering my students to be honest about who they were, because that's when I was going to get the most out of them as a student. They were going to be the most whole person they could be. So I was standing up in the front of my classes, encouraging my students to be the best they can be, while simultaneously not doing that for myself. and that led to a really intense mental health time for me. So moved away, and as of this year, I've found my way back to teaching. I'm in a school that's completely upside down, different to that Christian school I used to work at. It is a small independent school that is run as a school especially for students with various things going on in their life, various traumas, anxieties, depression. It's not a mainstream school. It's not a state-run school. We are just sort of our own thing, and we do our own thing. Some of the students at my school haven't been to school for 2 years because that's been just they can't go for various reasons. So that's the kind of space that I'm in, and it is such a beautiful place to be. When I heard about the Citipointe stuff, I was not surprised. I've been waiting for this moment to come for a very long time. The only thing that surprised me was the way that the community stood up and stood against it. There are a number of schools where I would have expected them to follow suit in a similar way had this not gained the media attention that it did. Because ever since when was that election? New South Wales state election was 2019. Yep, 2019. Mark Latham was voted into the Senate in the state of New South Wales. Ever since, he's been trying to push some legislation through the state parliament, including legislation to ban teachers from discussing at any amount trans people. So there are people at work who are trying to raise LGBTQ people from existence. So I could have hypothetically been employed by a state-run school where they're not allowed to discriminate towards me on the basis of sex and gender diversity. So I could get a job there, but then not talk about being trans, even though it's very obvious that I am as soon as I open my mouth, because I have a very low voice for a lady, you know. And then obviously kids are going to ask questions. There are going to be students at that school who are LGBTQ for certain, and I would have been like at risk of losing my job. So this is like the political space that I'm in. I have to be tuned into what's going on politically on this issue, because it is my own personal rights at stake, right? It is about the government is looking at people like me, deciding it thinks it knows what we are like, and then passing judgments for the rest of the country. So I have to be in tune with this, because if I need to know if I'm all of a sudden not going to be safe to go out on the street because I have no rights anymore, because this is the sort of climate that I'm in. For the students at Citipointe, my heart broke. Can you imagine if you were if you were an LGBTQ student at that school who was not out to mum or dad or anyone, you know that in yourself just a little bit, and then you see this statement come out that compares you to pedophiles and bestiality? Can you imagine how that would feel? And not only that, but knowing that, hey, mum and dad actually agrees with that. They think that I'm no worse than a pedophile. And I can't, who can I tell?
Yeah, nobody to
Who
talk
can I tell that's going to listen to me? Who's safe to talk to? Those students, that is crushing to a young person who's just trying to work out who they are. I have no more words to describe how that would feel. I know I was watching a video the other day, throwing out some quotes around stuff. if you are same-sex attracted, if you are a same-sex attracted young person, you are twice as likely to self-harm than the rest of your age group. If you are a trans or gender diverse person, you are 5 times more likely to self-harm. Those people are vulnerable. They are the people that we need to be stepping up and taking care of. And in Australia, we have a funny thing with our school system, right? Because the state funds these religious schools, okay? And I'm just talking religious schools as a whole. Adventist schools, that's a whole, but I'm in general. And so when parents are looking at their child and they look at what school options they have, okay? They have a state-run system or they have the independent school system, and the most of all independent schools are run by Christian organizations, right? So mum and dad might look at the state school and go, that's a bit rough. Don't want my kid going there. I've got a bit of money on the side. Yes, I'm going to invest in my kid's education and I'm going to send them to a private school. Inevitably, that ends up being religious schools. Christian schools are no longer just, they're schools run by Christians only for the Christian kids of the church. It's not how they run anymore. They are schools who happen to be seen as ministry points to try and convert young people. Okay. However, there's a chunk of parents who have no interest in the religion stuff. They just want their kid to get a good education. So when a Christian organization puts out this view that is not in step with the general public, because it's not, we've seen that very, very clearly now, we're going to have a massive issue. Because Christian school goes, hey, well, we're Christians, so we have a right to exclude everyone that we think is doing the wrong thing. And if you're going to take away our right to exclude you from enrollment or whatever, then that's fine. We'll continue doing our own thing and just make their lives hell if you happen to be LGBTQ, right? Because the legislation that was thrown around in the last week around protecting religious rights in a religious discrimination legislation, there was a big caveat around there's a get-out clause of effectively you can do anything that is a sincerely held religious belief. So if you sincerely believe that the gays are going to hell, and it is your God-given duty to tell them, doesn't matter how hurtful it is, you're allowed to say that. Sure, maybe we were going to maybe there was some chatter about tweaks to legislation to make sure that schools couldn't expel students for being same-sex attracted. But there was going to be nothing stopping them, those organizations, from making a same-sex attracted student's life hell in that environment. Because you'd have the protection of going, well, it's my sincere religious held belief that you're going to hell. Like, it's my sincerely religious held belief that you're just as bad as a pedophile. And for a while there, it was going to look like trans folks were going to be completely left out of it entirely. That the people who are at most vulnerable to abuse from people around them, the people who are at most most vulnerable to themselves, those are the people that we were going to leave off and go, well, that's too hard. We'll deal with that later. So I am angry. I am not surprised. I'm heartbroken. I am many things. I am very encouraged to see the way that the community has stepped up and in support. That is really wonderful thanks, Jacqueline. Sorry, friend of mine. I've just lost my whole train of thought. But yeah, look, it's a whole lot of things. I am so very glad that I am in the school where I am now, where students are completely loved and affirmed for exactly who they are, so they can flourish into their best selves. That is one of the biggest goals of the school that I'm at, is to encourage students to be their best selves. Because if we don't encourage these students to be their best selves, then they just don't come to school. You know? And gosh, they are absolutely amazing. Sure, they might struggle in maths because it's hard. Maths sucks sometimes. But I tell you what, I love them to bits. Love them to bits. And I think the special thing for me being in that place is the impact that I get to have on those students. They can see a trans person who's an adult, who's actually got it worked out, and to actually have that role model is such an unbelievable privilege for me. Such an unbelievable privilege that they can see me and go, oh, wow, I can do this, and it is going to be okay, and it is going to work out, and all of that sort of stuff is such an empowering thing. So it's I'm really, blessed to be where I'm at.
Thanks, Arden. I want to chat to you for a minute, Wendell. When I did the interview with you and I view you as a warrior, but a warrior that brings love into this conversation. You even have a great little catch cry, making love infectious, I think. Am I correct?
I know that.
But you've been involved with this since the mid-'80s, early '80s, maybe even before then. And when we did our interview on, I think season 2 might have been an SDAQ&A, it's still, I think, the most watched video interview. And so many people asked me to transcribe it, which we have gone ahead and done and will make available very soon, because a lot of the things you said in that were so pertinent, and almost spoken like beautiful memes that people could kind of take away, little gems. So I'm very keen to bring you into the conversation and tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement in the community, and also your thoughts when you saw this article about the Citipointe contract.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I come from an Adventist background, and I'm very grateful that my religion taught me about the value of people and the value of honesty, but the fear was that if I was honest, I'd get rejected. And so the essence of love is that we value people and we value the truth. And Arden really explained that well, that every human on the planet, even if religion's not in the equation, has to somehow join their value with their truth to be able to stay alive. And without that, if your truth means that you think that you are worthless, then we get predictable depression, suicide. And so for me, God is love is actually enough religion. And so I like to look at what are the ingredients of love, and the ingredients are a sense of worth or acceptance, and then join that with your truth. And that truth might be your sexuality or your gender or your past or whatever truth you need to integrate with your value to be able to stay alive in a really survival world. I think if Jesus was here, he'd probably say, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because those zealous people were justifying killing Jesus because of their zealous beliefs. And so when I see the people in this Pentecostal church school having zealous beliefs that result in preventable death, then I think that they don't understand the message that God is love. And love must value people and the truth. Otherwise, the opposite of love is rejection. And then the denial of truth, which is called denial, lies, hypocrisy. And Jesus was very clear to speak out against hypocrisy and lies and pretense. And he was very clear to speak up for the value of all people. And so if we don't get that message from Jesus, we've missed the whole reason that Jesus came, was to actually define love, which was about valuing people and nurturing respect for truth. I did go and work in prisons. And so prison taught me about valuing people and being honest. And so while my church taught me the theory of love, prison taught me the pragmatics of love, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I think that's why Jesus said, I was in prison and you visited me, because now love became a pragmatic reality, not just a theory. I also helped set up the Gay and Lesbian Health Service, and I have worked in HIV since the beginning of the epidemic. I've run the Gay and Lesbian Alcohol and Drug Recovery Group for the last 31 years, helping damaged people help each other and find out how that they are valuable people. And my definition of an addict is an addict's a valuable person who doesn't know it. And so recovery is about reclaiming value. And when I see people rejected by church and society turning to the anesthetic of alcohol and drugs, I think that the people who do the rejecting need to realize their accountability, because they're actually devaluing people, causing them to seek relief in anesthetics. I run a group for men who've been raped or sexually abused called Mars, and I've cared for more than 1,500 men who've been raped or sexually abused. I work with victims and perpetrators, male and female victims, male and female perpetrators, and I do work with pedophiles, and I do work with people who seek fulfillment in bestiality. And so I'm actually privileged to actually value all people and not participate in a sick relative value model that society says that these people are more or less valuable than each other. And if we want to think that we could measure someone's value, we don't understand that Jesus put value on each person. And so that's why I have resigned from the Seventh Adventist Church. That because I can't be a hypocrite. I have to be honest to be a spiritual person. I have to be honest to be alive. And Arden said it well. If you can't be honest and live yourself and enjoy your value, then suicide is an option. And until I could accept myself and be honest, I too was suicidal. I was sacked by the Seventh Adventist Church, despite having worked for them in both Warburton and in Hong Kong, being the missionary doctor. I did have a save the world mentality, but I realise now that's God's job, and I think it's our job to love and God's job to judge. And Jesus said, I want my home to be a home for all people. And so he took a whip to the people who wanted to be judgmental and rip people out and judge people. And he said that the wheat and the tares will grow together, and it's not the job of the wheat to judge the tares or the job of the tares to judge the wheat. He said, I'm an inclusive, accepting, valuing person. And when we let God do the judging and we do the loving, then you actually want to know God. But if you be the judge, you won't want to know God. The principal of that school was actually acting on the beliefs of that religion. And so that's why he seemed to be a hero, because he was just saying publicly what they believe within their religion. And they're the origins of the Exodus movers that tried to change the gay people into straight people. That organisation has now closed because it was found to be not just a failure, but also it damaged people. And I have many patients who were damaged, and they preach unconditional love, but they practice conditional love. And that's very toxic. And when you internalise that, you believe that you're worthless. And they add another layer to that. And they say that if God doesn't do the magic and change you, then you don't have enough faith. So they do what's called victim blaming. And that's very toxic, and it leads to suicidality. And many of those patients turn to alcohol and drugs as well. As well as that, I don't think they realise that as well as causing preventable suicides, they do result in preventable murders. And I've seen at least 7 murders that come from a thing called internalised homophobia, where people believe that they are evil for being gay. They try and suppress their sexuality, and then when they can't suppress it and they find themselves in having opportunistic sex in secret ways, hidden ways, and guilt-ridden ways, they then sometimes want to blame the person they had the sex with and murder them after the sex. And so I've certainly seen people in prison who've gone home and had consensual sex and then murdered the person after the sex.
Wow.
It's important to know that Daniel Morecambe went to the bus stop trying to go shopping for his brother's Christmas present, and next to the bus stop where the bus driver left him because the bus was full was a Pentecostal church. And the man who was going to that church was Brett Cowan, and he actually saw Daniel there and offered to take him to the shop, but said, first of all, we have to go home and tell my wife where we're going. And so he pretended to be heterosexual. In fact, he wasn't. And so he was having sex with men, and I know because they're my patients. And so he was going out with the minister's daughter, trying to deny his sexuality, to be the hypocrite. And if you deny your true self to try and get accepted within a subculture, it's a very toxic formula. And you'll see it with priests as well. When they try and deny their sexuality to get virtue out of being celibate, thinking that they'll get relative value by being better than other people, that denial is very toxic and very dangerous. And if you can't accept yourself and integrate your truth with your value, you don't get to enjoy your value, and you don't get to get your needs met as an equal. And so you're vulnerable to get your needs met as an unequal with people who aren't free to say yes or no, like children, or people who are less able to be equal. And so I think that church needs to own that their beliefs, although they're zealous in their beliefs, actually result in not valuing people, nurturing denial and hypocrisy. And Jesus was very clear to speak out against denial and hypocrisy.
Hey, Wendell, can I just jump in there and just affirm that not, I suppose, just because someone's gay doesn't necessarily mean that they are a sex abuser? Can I just affirm that? Because I just wanted to make sure that was clear that everybody doesn't go away with that link and go, oh, sex abusers, they're all the LGBTQ folk.
Sure, and I really appreciate you adding that, because men murder women and women murder men, and gay and lesbian people murder each other. But the key issue is that people who don't accept themselves turn to power or denial, and power and denial are the toxic things, not the gender or the sexuality of the person doing it. And so I like to name it that power and denial are the ingredients of fear, and acceptance and honesty are the ingredients of love. And Jesus came to define love, and so that's why he's the essence of my spirituality.
Absolutely. I'm picking up everything that you're putting down. I'm on the same page. I just want to affirm for the viewers, because sometimes that's a weapon that has been used to hurt us in terms of the queer community, to say that silly slippery slope arguments or things like that, and to say, well, or to say that that all pedophiles are gay, and that's statistically not true.
That's exactly
hurt people. That's what happens.
And
whether they're gay, straight, trans, or not, hurt people.
And value people, and that's the essence of prevention.
But being LGBTQ of any kind does not predispose you to what's my word that I'm looking here for?
Being a perpetrator of abuse.
Well, being a perpetrator of abuse. It doesn't predispose you to that.
Yeah, and if you accept yourself and you're free to be honest, you're then free to accept and respect honesty of other people. And so that's actually the prevention of abuse, is for valuable people to be free to be honest and to let other people be honest so they can value each other. And so that's why I'm a love pusher, because love means someone needs to feel valuable, to feel safe, to have the ability to join our truth with our value, to actually have self-respect and mutual respect. And the sad thing about being gay is that, if you didn't have to be in, you wouldn't have to come out. And the only reason people are in, because they're living in fear that their honesty will get them rejected. So I couldn't come out to my trusted friend till 31 until my family took 35. And that's why my suicidality continued until 31. But now that I'm free to accept myself, I don't need to judge other people, and I'm able to be a space where other people can reclaim their right to be honest, whether they've been a victim or a perpetrator, to therefore not abuse in the future. And so it's not that you were a victim or that you're gay or lesbian that makes you a risk to be a perpetrator. It's if you don't value yourself, because then you're at risk of not valuing other people. But I'm really glad that you raised that, because I didn't want to be misunderstood. Thank you very much.
That's right.
And I think what's actually really important about that, just circling back around to the Citipointe discussion, is that there are probably a lot of Christian schools and state schools. Let's not just single out Christian schools, but there are probably a lot of schools in which there have been abuse. Things happen where, teenage kids have abused each other, whether that be at parties or in school culture, where there have been things go on between teachers and students. There's a lot that happens in the sort of sexual misadventure sphere that has nothing to do with being LGBTIQ or any of the unrelated things on that list that was in the Citipointe document. And I think another thing that was in the discussion we had with Nathan's friend was just that basically what happens in terms of sexuality at a school, is completely different to what stated values are anyway. A lot of these schools will push an abstinence-only doctrine and not sort of understand that that's actually not what's happening. Or a lot of schools will jump on an issue like excluding LGBTIQ people while not actually addressing issues of consent at their school.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, in the sphere of sexuality, there's actually a lot that goes on that could probably be talked about a bit more openly and honestly, and that's just not happening. So I think an issue like this, while it probably does have a lot to do with the discrimination bill and does have a lot to do with the way that people see each other, I think it also could be an avenue as a positive thing to open up discussion about some of these other issues and to actually acknowledge that you can't paint what you see as a pristine picture and expect people to fit into it, but you actually have to meet people where they are.
And it's also interesting that people who judge have usually got the most to hide. And so that's why God says, judge not that you be not judged. And so, again, when I see people seeking safety in judges and seeking safety in prejudice, I just feel sad that they don't realise how much safety there is in respect, because in respect we can enjoy valuing each other and we don't need to judge each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wanted to add to that the research shows that the more accepting the environment around a young person who is having these struggles, it's a protective factor against self-harm, against suicide, against risky behavior. So we put them in an environment where they have to hide who they are, they're not supported, and then they engage in risky behavior because of that. And then we point at the risky behavior and say, see, I told you that's what will happen. So when I heard about this this news situation happening, that's what I was thinking about, our students, you know, our young people, and that they weren't being offered a safe, supportive, loving environment. So then they will be at risk for all these things. And that's why I think these discussions are really, really important, and that people realize that we actually can make a difference, a real life physical difference with our support and our love and care. And the research, there's hundreds of studies where that's borne out. It's a protective factor to be accepting and loving.
Yeah, that's super cool. There was on the project, there was an alumnus. There was a young lady who, I believe she identifies as a lady. Please forgive me if I'm wrong, but a young LGBTIQ person.
Say person.
Yes, I'll say person.
Catch-all terms.
Yes, I'm not 100% sure actually whether what their pronouns are. So anyway, but this person said on the project that attending school as a rainbow person, this is a direct quote. They said, you never heard anyone say anything loving about you.
Yep.
Love was for others, not for you. And this is this young person directly talking about this particular school, but it could be, you know, true of other schools as well.
I think that's true of most Christian schools in this country. I know it's true of this Christian school that I worked in the past. I since have been told that they've changed their tune a little bit. It was true of the Adventist school that I went to at the time. Like, this is very normal.
Yeah, and they said that there are things that couldn't be talked about that can now be talked about as a result of what's happened. So that is a potential, you know, obviously it's awful for the school and all the rainbow kids in the school and families and everyone to have had to be dragged through this. But, you know, one potential positive that can come from it is that now they can talk about some of these things. And that was what this young person said. And then they said, you know, look, even if a school wants to decide on one view, if they would be willing to listen to people who have a different view and who've experienced things differently, then, you know, that might actually help everyone shape what it means to be a Christian. I thought that was quite profound, just that thought that actually maybe we can be humble enough to listen to someone with a different experience and to take that in.
It's really important for bullying culture as well, because the most common bullying terms within the school playground is poofed or faggot. And so the actual truth is that the people who often, the bullies are the people who are the least self-accepting people, who want to put other people down to actually mask their own unresolved self-acceptance issues. And so certainly gay bashers are often gay people who don't accept themselves. And so again, I don't want to stigmatize gay people, but we need to have a culture that's inclusive, respectful, and nurtures honesty rather than nurtures discrimination, rejection, and
hypocrisy. That's a society-wide problem. It's a society-wide problem about how we talk about minorities, because we still haven't solved that. Is that gay is still one of the biggest insults that's thrown around.
Yeah.
And like, don't get me wrong, the situation's much better with young people than it was when I was at school, but it's still a long way to go. I think I'm not as optimistic as you, though, Ruth Ellen. I think the people who stood up and said, yeah, I'm going to stand against the whatever they want to call it, whether they want to call this some sort of epidemic of queers or whatever they want to say, I don't think they're actually interested in listening to the experiences of others who are different to them. I genuinely feel like their point of view is that anything. So if they sat down with me, anything that I say, they'll use against me.
Like cry victim, like you're persecuting me for my Christian beliefs.
Exactly. Or they'll just go, well, you're just broken because you're trans, so your opinion's not valid. Do you know what I mean? Like, they will just use whatever they can to dismiss me.
What I was trying to say was just the words from those that had been at school and involved with the school, just to say that what they see as a positive is that some of these things are now actually out in the open to be able to be talked about. And I think there'll certainly be some Christian communities where they can't be talked about because their culture is too toxic. But there are potentially other Christian communities that might be a little more open and accepting and able to have some of those conversations. So, you know, I guess I don't mean to be overly optimistic inappropriately. It's just, I guess, their own words that they were hoping that some of those conversations could change things.
Early on, when I was still a trans baby and the whole world was new and shiny and I was seeing it in a whole new light for the first time, I believed that I could change the world and change, well, at least my worlds that I had connection to, the people who knew me. I could perhaps change their point of views, but unfortunately that wasn't the reality. The people who were going to affirm me were the people who were going to affirm just any trans person anyways. The people who didn't affirm me are the people, well, I wasn't going to change their mind about trans or LGBT folk. The battle is a lot of battle lines have been drawn, and it takes a lot for someone to swap sides. The only people left are the people sitting on the fence. Those are the only people I can hope to make an impact on. But most of these people are not on the fence anymore. Pete?
That just brings me to a thought that I wanted to kind of open up to everybody, and perhaps start with Wendell. When I did the interview with Floyd Penitz, one of the things that was left with me was when he tells the story of how he came out to his mother, and she said, well, okay, I accept that, but don't tell anybody. That alludes a little bit to what you're saying, Arden, where there's a group of people that aren't really speaking up. So I'm interested in your thoughts. If leadership in a church, and perhaps speak to within Adventism, isn't publicly speaking up in support of being an ally, does that have negative ramifications as well, or is it okay that they're doing things behind the scenes? So I'll open up that to perhaps Arden first. You look like you were about to say something.
Yeah,
and then I have a specific twist on that for Wendell.
I've had Adventist pastors message me privately, but that hurts. It kind of feels like Nicodemus going to Jesus in the middle of the night because he doesn't want anyone to know. Like as if talking to me might be dirty, or that they might get in trouble. Like, all it continues to tell me is that I'm something to be hidden away and not to be talked about properly, right? Like, I had something else on my brain. No, go back. Why must you do this? I think that, like, public support would mean the world, but no one's brave enough to do it because it is such an unbelievable risk for them. And I think that we're stuck in this stalemate. Meanwhile, our Adventist school cultures have already moved on this issue, because our schools, well, I say don't really consider myself an Adventist, but Adventist schools have already shifted culturally on this issue, because their charter is to love and support their student body. And that has meant making some difficult choices about supporting and affirming LGBTQ youth. It's already happened in our schools.
Can I just say there, I mentioned Floyd earlier there. He's the president of SDA Kinship. And those that are watching that may want to reach out and find out more information and find a community that they can feel very much included in and safe within, just Google Kinship, SDA Kinship, and join up. I really encourage you to, even if you're not part of the LGBT plus community, if you want to be an ally, you can join up there as well. And it's a terrific movement. So I'd highly recommend you get in touch with Floyd or just Google their website. Can I just come to you, Wendell? Because one thing that struck me in my observation of various hot potatoes within Adventism, and perhaps this one the most, the silence of leadership. Have you sensed, and you've left the church, but have you sensed, would you say that back in the day, in the 80s, when you were perhaps being more involved civically with this kind of thing, that Adventist leaders were more silent back then, or are they equally silent now, from as an observation? I want to open this up to everybody as well, this idea of leadership that's perhaps a bit silent. I might be wrong.
I like the message that you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. And the truth is that you are a valuable person. And when you know that truth, and that truth is rooted in God's love for you, then you are free to live with any truth. And sometimes people like those sayings because they think that then the truth is a factual thing and there's virtue in facts. But unless those facts are linked to valuing people, those facts can be used to devalue people. So we need to hear the whole message. You'll know the truth, and that is you're valuable, so that then you can live with the truth. And when I see people in the church scared to be honest, it makes me sad that they don't know the truth, that God loves them. And I worked on the Pacific Division's AIDS policy, and they wanted to have words that excluded a policy that did not mention once about gay or lesbian, bisexual or transgender people, and they weren't willing to use the word condom unless it was in New Guinea for putting it on a banana. And they could use it in the non-first world, but in the first world they couldn't actually use the words. And I said, people actually feel judged by the silence. And so I see young Adventist people committing suicide over sexuality, and while you participate in the silence, you are effectively judging those people. And when I came out to my family at the age of 35, it was okay while they thought it was a secret, but then when I got an award called the AMA Best Individual Contribution for Healthcare in Australia, which is like Australian Doctor of the Year, the journalist asked me who I was and whether I was married, and I said, oh, I'm gay. And anyway, Mum said, it's not enough to be evil, but if you influence other people to be evil, it'd be better than a millstone we put around your neck and you cast into the depths of the sea. Because in her belief system, her love for me meant she had to rescue me from hell. And so I actually felt judged by her trying to rescue me from hell. And that's why for 22 years I had to help her realize that God's love was bigger than judging people. And so Mum changed in the last 7 years before she died to actually be able to let go judging me. And I said, when we know that our job is to love and God's job is to judge, then we can have a friendship where I can be honest for the purpose of us having love that includes honesty, not love that excludes honesty. Then we can know that God's love is bigger than our prejudice. And so I actually think that she and I were gifts to each other to see how big God's love was. And I think when the church doesn't realize that love's about valuing people and valuing the truth, they're missing out on the essence. And, you know, I talked before how that Pentecostal church seeks to change people and judge people. When Jesus did the 5 loaves and 2 fishes miracle, people wanted him to go and do the miracle again. And he said, no. And that's one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible, because he said, I didn't come to define miracles where I'm going to zap you and make you straight. He said, I came to define love. And if we can't hear the love in Jesus' message, then in 1 John it says, if you judge people, you can't claim that you know God. And that's very clear words. And he said, perfect love casts out fear. And when you know that love, you don't need to judge. And when I'm hearing the Citipointe story, I'm really sad. And they're seeking to put people in boxes of male or female. But for example, they exclude intersex people. And my patients made the movie Orchids, My Intersex Journey, and it's gone international. And at birth, they're not defined as male or female. They're in a spectrum in between, and they're beautiful people. And while we seek safety in labelling and prejudice, we don't know that better safety comes from love and respect.
That's so
Yeah,
profound.
well,
I can hear what you meant, Peter, when you said that he was speaking in sound bites and memes. Not to great what you're saying, but it's just everything you say is so wise. Thank you.
I think if we were able to have open conversation is what would promote growth.
Yeah.
And I think
until
that's
we
part of
can't-
the...
Sorry.
I was just gonna. I'll wrap that. I'll jump in after that.
Yep.
Until we can have open conversation about this with church leaders, we will be in this holding pattern.
Yes.
And it's loaded for church leaders to speak up about it, because they're stuck in. I think that some of them who feel themselves affirming or not affirming feel stuck in the middle, right? Because you have a higher leadership who will be like, well, you can't condemn LGBTQ people because that's going to create furor and possibly media or whatever they're worried about. Okay, and you'll have people who are like, no, you can't say that because it hurt people. Thank you. But then at the same time, you'll also have angles of you can't affirm those people because that goes against the Bible. And that's within the structures of leadership. So you have that from leadership above whoever you're talking about. And then below, you have the church membership who are also going to do that. So by staying silent, they're actually able to play both sides of the coin, and that's safe.
Yes.
But until we have those open conversations, we will be forever stuck in this spot.
It's only safe for the people in the privileged positions.
That's right.
Exactly.
And it's also one of the things, and this was even came out in our conversation with the parent from Citipointe, is simply the basically the living in Disneyland idea of saying that these people aren't in our school already.
Yeah.
You know, however do you find these people?
Exactly.
And you just know that 10, 20%, 25% of the school population are either that, you know, somewhere in their definition of all these things that are wrong, or are intimately and closely connected with those folks.
Yeah.
A friend of mine who's a pastor was a pastor in a suburban church here in Melbourne, you know, very run-of-the-mill standard kind of congregation. He recognised that there was a number of families in their church that had gay children. And so he invited all the mothers from those families to come together and just to come to his place for lunch. Now, most of them didn't know the stories of the other families. And so you had these 6 mothers who had so much in common, but because of this kind of facade and basically this active denial that this was something that would be talked about in this conversation, you know, that would be talked about in this congregation. Once those 6 mothers got together, their conversation was, oh, sorry, am I holding forth without saying anything? No, I'm right. So in this situation, they brought together these 6 mothers to share their stories. And of course, when you look across a standard church, you know, Adventist church congregation of a couple of hundred members, and you say, okay, well, there's 6 families. And so there's fathers and mothers, brothers and sisters, all of these kind of things, who are intimately connected with these stories and that love these people simply by being part of their families, and even might be, fraught and whatever between what they've been taught and the lived experience that they have. And imagine what that basis, that church could have had this really open conversation, but it didn't happen. It happened in a kind of quiet corner where these 6 mothers were able to share their stories and really resonate and support each other from that. But that should be enough of a critical mass in a church congregation to be able to just completely transform it. So I think one of the things that we can do is recognize that this is a reality in our congregations, and that one of the things that I am seeing in the church is that there are more and more people disconnecting from church because they're hearing these kinds of statements like the Citipointe one coming from church leadership, and people are saying, well, I actually have morals, so I don't want to be part of a church like that. And it would be a morally backward step for me to continue to be part of this church. And so even when we have church leaders who are joining in the culture wars and marching off to the Senate to defend our right to discriminate,
or after they're passing the money across the table.
And so they're when they do that, they're actually losing the church. And they're damaging, it's an attack on our people. And I think that's something that we have to recognize, that we, as a church, it's not us versus the world, that we're actually all in this together, and that we need to have these kind of conversations, and we need to recognize that whatever we might say about those bad people out there is hitting somebody not too far from you and really hurting them.
There was a study that I looked at that talked about the more you got to know someone who was a rainbow person, the better your perceptions of them were, and that oftentimes Christian people, when faced with the dilemma of choosing either morals or ethics, they chose to be ethical people and changed their views on the topic because they knew the person that it wasn't theoretical anymore. It was a real person that they knew, that they loved, that they cared about. And I think that's what you're talking about, Nathan, is that people were like, we want to be a part of a group that's ethical. And you use the word moral, and I would say, yes, being kind and loving is also a moral issue. So, yeah.
And I think it's really interesting to note that we've skirted a little bit, but we haven't really mentioned theology at all this evening, which I think is great because, the theology of this is fascinating, and, there are many different ways to look at it. And I think probably all of us in this virtual room would, I don't want to speak for other people, but certainly I think there's room for the theology of affirmation in our church and in any Christian church. But I think quite aside from the theology, it's about human stories. And like Wendell said, and like you've all said in all of our own words, it's about being humble enough to listen to somebody else's story and say, yours is different from mine, your experience is different from mine. Let's find common ground. Let's work together, even if we see things a little bit differently. And, it has to be about that. Otherwise, we'll just keep splitting into smaller and smaller sects, just like that parent said.
I think you said it well, that people seek relief in denial. And my experience is people never use half-baked denial. They have to use really good denial, because half-baked denial doesn't work, but it's really rooted in fear. And I work in domestic violence at the state level as well. And in abusive relationships, power is always sustained by a denial process where someone denies someone a right to say yes or no, or a freedom, by using power. And so power and denial always go together to create abuse, and acceptance and honesty always go together to create love. And power and denial are rooted in fear, and fortunately acceptance and honesty are the ingredients of love. And that's why perfect love casts out fear is the essence of my spirituality and my current religion.
I like it. Now, we're going to wrap it up. I did want to have a question time, but I think what we can do is that those that are watching, if you're watching on YouTube and you'd like to be involved with the conversation, just find us on Facebook, SDAQ&A, and it's a private group, so just request to join the conversation. And this is season 3, episode 30. So we'd love you to get on board there, because each member of the panel here are members of that group, and you can tag them or ask them questions. So I'd invite you guys to go and just check the Facebook group there. A big help if you're interested in what I'm doing and want to support. You can. It's something as simple as just leaning forward right now and just clicking the like button in Facebook, or clicking the like or subscribe button on YouTube. It really, really helps get the word out there. And if you're a supporter of these kind of conversations, I'd value your support in return. That would be wonderful. I just want to close just quickly. Give us a last minute thought, bringing it back to Adventism. And by the way, there's just a quick comment I will just bring up that I thought was interesting, that put an interesting extra slant on why ministers might fear speaking publicly in this way. I had a minister tell me the main reason they chose not to become a publicly affirming congregation was because they would lose most of their congregation. That's another
Jacqueline's a trans
part of it.
friend of mine, so
Nice.
that's their angle as well.
And great comment there. Thank you, Jacqueline. And yeah, sometimes I think, well, maybe they're just scared to speak up because they're going to lose their job. But that kind of pays into that pastor getting a standing ovation. There are people in the congregation who don't want this, which makes it a very difficult scenario where, in many ways, are we offering false hope to people within the Christian denomination? You mentioned, Tammy, the atheist friend of yours, and I know the atheist community are huge supporters of the LGBTQ+. So good on them for that. So the last thing I just wanted to quickly tap into, just give us a 1 minute answer, and we'll go around. I'll ask each of you just to comment on this. Do you think the Adventist education system may be getting pressure from leadership and the congregations that we speak of here, and may feel that they need to put something in writing, some kind of contract as well? Is that likely to be on the horizon? Perhaps, Tammy, if you'd start.
I don't want to be too specific, but I have talked to Adventist educators, leaders, who have run professional development for their staff to make sure we are caring for our rainbow students. And that just makes me really, really proud and really, really positive about Adventist schools. So I think we have a long way to go, but we're on our way. And I'm proud to be a part of that. And I am so happy that I think it was you, Arden, that convinced me I needed to speak up because I was a closeted ally, which was doing no good. I just feel so much better about myself, and I can be honest about what I think with whoever I'm talking to. And so far, there haven't been major repercussions. But if they come, that's fine with me because I want to be true to myself. So,
That's great.
All for the cause, comrade.
Arden, give a minute of your thought on that question.
I haven't stepped foot in an Adventist school scenario for ages. My connections that I had suggested to me that the schools are doing a much better job on affirming LGBTQ people than some people might want to believe, which is a good thing. But again, I'm being like, Tammy's being careful about not naming schools. I'm being careful about not naming schools because that's something that I want to protect, right? That's not something I want to name a school lest
Ted
stuff
Wilson
goes down, right?
I
don't want to ruin a good thing.
It'd be great if Ted Wilson was watching. Hello, Ted.
Let me just say he has watched a couple of episodes in season 2, and in fact, a close friend who knows him via a relative asked him to be on the show, and he said no. So we even had some back
could have had him on the panel.
It's a political nightmare. I want to say that our schools are doing awesome, but it's all undercover and under wraps, so I can't say.
One of the things I've noticed is what a loss to the Adventist Church and to all of the churches, LGBTQ plus rainbow people add so much love and creativity to any community they're a part of.
Can I
And just
chuck?
what a loss! What a loss!
Can I go over my 1 minute and chuck like 2 cents into that?
You can.
So I think it's off the back of what Wendell was talking about as well, about like spaces of freedom and love. The most alive place I've ever been in my entire life is Hyde Park on the day of the Mardi Gras parade. That is the most beautiful celebration of life in all of its diversity that I've ever been in. It is the most alive, beautiful place because it is a place that is completely free of judgment. No matter how you're different, you are welcome and you are one. And it is such a very, very special place. And sometimes sometimes I call it Gay Christmas. But yeah, it's a really special place, and I think that so much of society is missing out on that when they refuse to let us shine the light that we have in our diversity. I think that's where I'm at. Cool.
Thanks
Wrap
so
it
much,
up.
Arden. Thank you. Hand it over to let's
To
hear
Nathan.
Nathan.
I don't have a lot of insight into what happens at a local Adventist school. It's been a long time since I've been to one, and that was grade 7, I think. So, that's a little while ago now. But, I'm kind of here as the token church employee and not speaking on behalf of no one, but still here as somebody employed by the church. I'm really sorry about the way we keep getting it wrong and the damage that we've done to people, and we need to keep trying to do it better.
I think if you had it... Oh, sorry. I need to shut up sometimes.
Nathan, do you fear a backlash at all from being on the show?
No. We haven't said anything controversial here this evening that I'm aware of. And I mean, I'm not worried particularly about that. I know too many people and their stories who have been hurt, and that's not what faith or church at its best does. And we need to be church at its best, and so we need to do better at this, and we need to talk about it honestly and openly. It's a reality in the churches around us, in the schools, and even talking about it in that way. I'm not saying that it's a problem. I'm simply saying this is life, this is people, and that's one of the best Bible studies I've been at was a small church group that involved a gay couple, and we were talking about Ephesians 5, that very troublesome verse about everybody submitting to, and of course it's always gendered. And the leader of the conversation simply turned to these two guys and said, how do you read this verse? And of course they took the gender out of it, and suddenly that wasn't a problematic text anymore. It brought the scripture alive in a new, in a healthier way. And so that's the kind of thing that we can, by listening to people that bring different perspectives to faith, to life, and all these things, we benefit from that. So when we shut people out, our world is less interesting and our faith is less healthy, and we need all the help we can get. So let me just say it, because we can't say it enough. I'm sorry, and let's keep working together to do it better.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan. Ruth Ellen?
Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, I think, I don't know if I can add much to that. I also don't have a great deal to do with Adventist schools specifically. I do have several people I love that work in them. And so I have a small insight into what happens. And certainly the loved ones that I know work in schools that strive to be welcoming and accepting, and certainly do have rainbow kids that they really try hard to support. So my vicarious experience of Adventist school as an adult is that I know and trust that people I know are doing their best. And I think that that to some degree is happening systemically as well as individually. I do think that our school system is not going to have an event like Citipointe. And if it did, I think there would be significant enough backlash from within the church as well as without that it would be very, very quickly knocked on the head in the Australian and New Zealand system. I can't speak for other countries. So, yeah, I think a lot of people in this group are still Adventist and a lot of people in this group are no longer Adventist, and people have their own spirituality and their own faith. And I think what I would want to leave people with from the perspective of somebody who really believes we are loved by God and loves God and who still chooses to be a part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I really believe that it's possible for us to do better and that it's possible for us to still work from within to make those changes so that we can reflect Jesus better. And, you know, full respect and full autonomy to those who've chosen to leave. And I think there are some really good reasons for that for people. And I certainly don't judge that choice. I think there's ways that those of us who've chosen to stay and those of us who have chosen to leave can just continue to try and encourage each other to growing in our faith and love towards others.
I think this conversation highlights that. There's three of us on here who wouldn't necessarily be Adventist anymore and three that are. And here we are having a wonderful conversation that we're hoping to breathe new life and new light and support into the conversation, into the topic. Thank you. Thanks, Ruth Ellen. And I wonder if Wendell, you could just give some thoughts a little bit there. If you think maybe the Adventist Church could come to this crossroads as well, or are they exempt from that?
Yeah. Nathan, I want to say thank you very much because I heard your sorry, and it's very meaningful to me because I know for many, many years your messages have been respectful and inclusive, and I've heard them. And so that gives weight to your sorry. And I think that that's a beautiful gift to us as an LGBT community and also a beautiful gift to the church. And so I hear you clearly. Thank you very much. I do think that Citipointe and the Seventh Adventist Church in these types of actions are actually seeking safety in the law. And certainly the church in America took kingship to court to try and stop them using the word SDA kingship. And the church lost. But the church has been proactive in the law in America to speak out against the rights of LGBT, especially transgender people. And so what I'm seeing is that some people who don't know about God's love actually seek safety in the law. And it's not abnormal because we humans often try to make laws and think that the safety comes from the law. But we need to listen to Jesus when he said, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. And if the cow's in the well, pull the cow out of the well. And so he said that the law is a gift, not a burden. And I like the concept that the law is our servant, not the law is our master. And when we seek safety in laws and in safety in prejudice, we don't know that there's much better safety in love. And so actually safety comes from love, not from the law. And so when we understand that the law is a reflection of love, we might actually be able to see that God wants us not to go outside the truth or not to murder each other or not to judge each other. And that's fantastic because that's what love does. It values people and it values the truth. And if we could move to safety in love, not safety in laws that are us trying to be God by judging others, then probably we'll be able to heal and also be able to connect with people who need God's love.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think that's a great place to leave it. Really appreciate that, Wendell. Thank you so much, Tammy and Arden and Ruth Ellen and Nathan and Wendell for being on tonight's program. Some of you will be in the Facebook group answering questions. Just go and write in there now. Those of you that are on the panel that can do that, just go and write a comment and people can ask you questions there. And yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Look forward to crossing paths with you all down the track. And just putting a little word out there, if you are an ordained pastor or commissioned Adventist pastor, you'd like to be the first person to come on the show and affirm your own personal support of the LGBTQ plus community, let me know. We'd love to have
What
you
a
here.
throwdown.
Just putting it out there.
Throwdown.
We've
Let's
gone
go.
over 150 episodes, and I want you to be the first person. Thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you.